Testing 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could ask members of the public to take a seat. I don't know if we can turn this sound down. It's awfully loud. Good morning and welcome to Finance and Economic Development Committee for the 6th of September. Bienvenue à la réunion pour le Comité des finances et de développement économique pour le 6 septembre 2016. If anyone would like to speak to any of the items on the agenda, if they could fill out a form just under the television screen and hand it to our City Clerk's Department, we'd be pleased to hear from you. We'll start with declarations of interest. Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. None. Confirmation of minutes. Adoption de procès verbaux for the 5th of July 2016 pour le 5 juillet 2016. Carried. Communications. Councillor Moffat, I believe you'll be asking the committee to lift an item. You have a motion on that?
Yes, thank you for that. This is an inquiry that I put in back in March and just got the response on Thursday, actually, for the first time, so that the Finance and Economic Development Committee approved the addition of this item for consideration by committee at the October 4th, 2016 FEDCO meeting pursuant to Section 89, Subsection 3 of the Procedure Bylaw.
So just for clarity's sake, you're asking that the inquiry be put on the agenda for October 4th?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So on the motion, carried. Carried. Thank you. Legislative Services, City Clerk and Solicitor, Status Update, Finance and Economic Development Committee Inquiries and Motions. Received. Appointment to the Bank Street BIA, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de la rue Bank, appointing Eric Maymet to the Bank Street BIA. Carried. Appointment to the Heart of Orleans Business Improvement Area, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de Côte d'Orléans, appointment of René Leblanc. Carried. Councillor Monette is representing me at a function today. Okay. Litigation and Labor Relations, Comprehensive Legal Services Report for the period January 1st to June 30th, 2016. Received. Corporate Services Department, 2016 Operating and Capital Budget Q2 Status Report. We'll have a staff presentation on that. Real Estate and Development Office, Expropriation of Lands, Combined Sewage Storage Tunnel. Technical Amendment to replace number 1. Who's moving that? Councillor Egli? Councillor Chernishenko, would you like to introduce it now, please?
Whereas at the time of Agenda 20 was released publicly, the Office of the Land Registrar at Ottawa had not yet completed its review and acceptance for registration of 2 reference plans, which legally describe approximately a dozen properties or property interests required for the combined sewage storage tunnel, and staff used the placeholders Draft Plan 1 and Draft Plan 2 as part of the description of the properties and property interests set out in Schedule 1 of the Expropriation Bylaw, attached as Document 1 to the report. And whereas the Office of the Land Registrar at Ottawa has since accepted the reference plans for registration, and they have been registered as 4R 29750 and 4R 29751 respectively, therefore be it resolved that Schedule 1, titled Schedule 1 Bylaw of the Expropriation Bylaw attached to this report as Document 1 be replaced with the revised and attached Schedule 1, which includes the necessary references to Plan 4R 29750 and Plan 4R 29751.
Okay, so that's a technical requirement. This is the last piece of the puzzle for our combined storm sewer, the Ottawa River Action Plan, which we're very excited. I think in the next couple of weeks we'll be digging ground on it. So any questions on the amendment by Councillor Chernishenko? On the motion, carried. Okay. On the report as amended, adopté. See. Delegation of authority, acquisition and sale of land and property, April 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2016. Received. Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department, Bells Corners, Bells Corners Community Improvement Plan. We have speakers, excuse me, on that, so we'll come back to that. Innovation Center at Bayview Yards, guarantor request for commercial bank financing. This allows the group to get a lower interest rate with us being the guarantor. Carried. Item 10, Brownfields Grant Program Application, 500 Preston Street. Carried. Under my report, public transit infrastructure funding. These are the projects that have been approved by the federal government, the $156 million, which is great news for our city. On the report, carried. In-camera items, we have none. So we'll go back to the first item that we have a delegation for, which is the Bells Corners Community Improvement Plan, and we'll ask, I guess, Chris Cope to come forward to the table if there are any questions. Just for the sake of members of council, this was an issue that I was very supportive of, and in fact in the last election campaign I made a commitment that the next natural CIP application should come from the Bells Corners area because it is going through a period of transition, and we have one speaker, I believe, and we received one letter in support of this. Maybe Mr. Moser and Cope, you can give us a brief overview, and then we'll ask our delegation, Alex Lewis, and I think this may be Alex's last appearance before committee because he is going on to be a police officer, I believe, in a First Nations community in Northern Ontario. So we congratulate him and thank him very much for the work that he's done with the BIA, building it up to the point that we're at today. And Jim is, of course, the chair of the BIA. So we'll ask Chris or John to give us a brief overview, and then we'll ask our delegation to come forward.
Thank you, Chair. This program is a community improvement plan program similar to programs we've done on Carling Avenue in Orleans, where we would be permitted under the Planning Act to provide grants for commercial property owners who improve their properties significantly and sufficiently to increase taxes. The form of grant is a single one in this case, and it would be based on 75% of the municipal portion of the tax increase each year to a maximum of $5 million. Now, we believe in Bells Corners the time is absolutely perfect. There are well over 200 properties that would be eligible, including some that are choice, in my opinion, such as the Zellers Loblaws property at the corner, and there's a 20-acre site that has a storage building on it back in behind the trailer park, and several other very significant properties where a significant development could be done, and could be done beneficially for the community of Bells Corners. We think having a combination of new businesses and new development in there will bring more customers, and add that to the influx of D&D residents, new residents, but also workers coming into the new D&D site on Moody Drive. We think the time is absolutely perfect for Bells Corners to sort of turn itself around, because it has had a somewhat difficult past, and in particular some of the restaurant businesses that have come and gone, so on. So we believe this will have excellent success, and we are hoping that we'll see some significant developments in Bells Corners.
Okay, that's a very good overview, and I think we'll ask Jim and Alex to come forward. I believe if we serve those, keep those two seats over there, or maybe John, you can just move over one, and we'll have Jim and Alex come forward. And I don't know if you heard on CBC Radio this morning, Jim did an interview. There's a very good piece on the CIP on CBC, and I think you went down memory lane and some of the ebbs and flows. We all remember IKEA when it was at Bells Corners, and that was a great destination. And obviously, with that property moving to Pinecrest, it's created a little bit of a void, but with the D&D employees moving in, there's another wonderful opportunity for that community. So, Alex and Jim, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
There we go. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, councillors, and staff. On behalf of the 330 members and member businesses, which are comprised of the businesses and the property owners, allow me to first say thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak on the proposed Bells Corners CIP. As some of you, as the mayor identified, this was a campaign promise, and we'd like to say thank you for getting it to this point, frankly. As a bit of a backgrounder, the Bells Corners BIA was established 8 years ago with a strong mandate of promoting and improving the business makeup of the area. The city to date, from what we've managed to discover, has all but forgot about it. For instance, the last time a secondary plan was drafted for the area was 1993 under the old City of Nepean, and before that a transportation study was commissioned in 1987. From what we've discovered, not one of the recommendations in either one of those studies were ever actually came to fruition. What we've seen, however, is a strong concentration on the smart growth of areas like Canada and Barrhaven that surround us. In 2012, the Bells Corners BIA spent approximately $40,000 of our own money on and sent in an RFP for the completion of a retail gap analysis study. And to date, this completed study has been our roadmap to success, and many of the priority and desirable businesses identified by customers through intercept surveys we've gone after, and in many cases managed to secure a permanent home in our area. And these include 2 gym facilities, a microbrewery, and some drastic changes to our restaurant landscape. Additionally, in only a few short years, we've managed to decrease our vacancy rate from one of the highest in the city for nearly a decade to slightly below average in both retail and office space sectors, with some help from some very dedicated brokers and the property owners themselves. But also with the news that the Bells Corners Nortel complex will soon be filled with thousands of Department of National Defence employees. And while the future looks bright for Bells Corners, today you all have before you a proposal to offer our area one more valuable tool in our toolbox of success. And through the hard work of city staff and economic development, we've identified several key properties which are being significantly underutilized or not utilized at all. And the next step for Bells Corners needs to be urban renewal and transformation. And the bottom line is we need more residents to support our businesses, and we need and want more jobs. Even with all these improvements, we've spearheaded the current conditions of Bells Corners show deterioration, and deterioration runs the risk of ruining the unique characteristics and positive attributes of our community. So on behalf of the Bells Corners BIA, I'd like to ask you to support this, and I'll pass it over to our chairman of the board.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, city staff, and Alex, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to potentially undertake a CIP for Bells Corners. What we've seen to date with the 2 public consultations, we had the 1 business and property owner consultation and 1 for residents. There is a strong desire for community development in Bells Corners, and the BIA has been shouldering a lot of that responsibility, and Alex has been working very hard to try and upgrade the business situation in Bells Corners, but we feel a CIP would go a long way. We feel that this proposal is a fair one. It's well thought out. It's been very well investigated by city staff. There's been an increased focus on public attention on local and community level priorities and municipal initiatives such as transit-oriented development and desire to more actively utilize our green space in a more inclusive and environmentally friendly fashion. What we need to do now is to narrow that scope, and unlike the previous studies that Alex mentioned, we actually need to implement a lot of the recommendations. A CIP for Bells Corners will foster the creation of new jobs, promoting true growth as opposed to just moving jobs from one neighborhood to another. We need to start ensuring that Bells Corners is competitive citywide and globally, not just competing with other neighborhoods. This may be the stage 1 for the city, and this is 7 years in the making for our businesses. As Mayor Watson mentioned, I've been in Bells Corners now with my business for over 25 years and saw what Bells Corners was at the beginning with a draw like IKEA being in the mix. Having moved that anchor tenant out, we feel that we need more large-scale draw businesses, and we feel that with the coming of the D&D employees to our area, a CIP is going to happen for us at the very best time to take advantage of those growth opportunities.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to say thank you to Alex and for his work on behalf of your BIA on Ottawa Council of BIA. You did a great job taking us where we are today, and it is our city loss, but it's our province gain for being a police officer somewhere else in the province. So we want to wish you all the best, and to your successor on Ottawa Council BIA, all the best. And I know they will have a big shoe to fill. So thank you again for your work.
Thanks, Eli.
Councillor Shirelli, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just following up on that, I think Alex has done a tremendous job at uniting the business community in Bell's Corners and making them understand that things are getting better and have a chance to get much better very soon. It's also fitting, I think, that this is his last official act as Executive Director of the BIA. After this, he goes to Rideau Hall tomorrow to be honored by the Governor General, and then it's off to Police College. So I think the timing on this is almost poetic, and I think the results are going to be an excellent story as well.
And you forgot to mention his time in your office, where he's had to unlearn so many things.
Okay. That's where I became the monster.
Councillor Harder.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say that I'm surprised, Jim, that it's only 25 years that your business has been there, because it feels like longer than that. That means that I was there.
It was a lot longer to him.
Well, I think when I was the councillor for Bell's Corners after amalgamation, it's something that the business community really started to come together then, and that's before you had the official BIA. And I think our first major win was the North Side Road, for sure, and how controversial that was in the community. I mean, I certainly didn't do it I did it for the business reasons, and certainly not because of the community desire. So it was quite outstanding, the level of effort that had to go into it.
Controversial, to say the least, yes.
Pardon?
Controversial, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. But it was the right thing to do. So I think that, very sorry to see Alex go. I mean, I know with my daughter, who is executive director of the Barrhaven Business Improvement Area, and she have worked really well together. I've appreciated your input on many issues. But I think that leaving it with Jim and his history, it will go very, very well. So good luck. I think it's, like you said, perfect timing.
Right. So as I mentioned, we also have a letter from, I believe it's Danielle Paquette, in support of the Community Improvement Plan. So on the report, carried. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations, Jim and Alex, and good luck to you, Alex. Okay, our next item, we have a presentation by staff. If I believe the treasurer would come forward, it is Operating and Capital Budget Q2 Status Report. I think there's a PowerPoint as well.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a very brief presentation summarizing the results of the report in front of you, which includes where our actual position at the end of June, and the forecast for the end of the year for both tax and rate. Isabel Jasmine, the Deputy City Treasurer, will be taking you through those.
Thank you, Marion. So for the Q2 status report, the quarterly operating and capital status reports are prepared as part of the reporting framework approved by Council. The year-end forecasts are also presented in the second quarter of the report. So the report that came out with the second quarter also includes a forecast to the end of the year. It does not include the results for boards, commissions. Those are presented in separate reports. So transit, police, public health, library are not included in these results. So overall, as of June 30th, we're showing a surplus in the tax-supported programs of $3 million and in the rate-supported program of $1.6 million for a total of $4.7, and we're forecasting to the end of the year at $6.5. There is a deficit in the city operations, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, primarily because of winter operations, but that's offset by surpluses in the non-departmental area and also in additional assessment growth. So for the June 30th results, the 2016 budget addressed many of the systemic budget pressures. So when we're reporting against these results, we've included changes that we made in the 2016 budget, and those key changes were additional funding for WSIB costs. Those costs were rising, and we made sure to include additional funding for those costs. And we also added more for vacancy provisions in the 24/7 operations. In the rate-supported area, because of trends in water consumption, we adjusted it and lowered it based on actual experience. So the rate budget reflects more of the recent trends in water consumption. In terms of the actual June 30th results, there was $3.1 million surplus for tax-supported programs. The city operations deficit of $10.4 million is primarily from winter maintenance costs. There was significant December storms cleanup in 2016, and also a record snowfall in February, on February 16th. That was actually offset by additional savings in the non-departmental area. We have $2 million from the elimination of the 36 positions. We had budgeted $1 million, and we actually came in with $2 million because we budgeted for a part year, and it ended up being a full year of 36 position savings. We also have $2.4 million in hydro dividends above budget, and then $1.9 million in additional investment income, penalty, and interest in Provincial Offences Act revenues. We also have $1 million in payments in lieu of taxes. We also have the $4.2 million provision from additional assessment growth. At the tax ratios report, we mentioned that we were including $4.2 million in the non-departmental area to help to offset any deficits. So in terms of the forecast, we have surpluses in some areas, we have deficits in others. I'll start with the surpluses. In solid waste, we have $1 million, planning and infrastructure $1 million, and in program support, 0.6. In the non-departmental accounts, same as I talked about in the previous slides, only we're forecasting the end. We've added an extra $3 million in investment income. Additional assessment growth is also relevant for the end of the year. So in terms of deficits, the city operations in total is $15.7 million in deficit. Public Works is $10.6 million. Fire services, 3.8, and sorry, Public Works is primarily the winter maintenance operations. Fire services is an increase in WSIB costs. And then we have Parks and Rec 0.7, which is a decrease in revenues. And then in the non-departmental area, we have a reduction of $700,000 in the Rideau Carleton slot revenues. So overall, the June 30th results is a $1.6 million surplus, and then the forecast to the end of the year is a $5 million surplus. So the risk areas in the forecast are primarily for the WSIB costs. There's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders, that have been included as qualifying for WSIB costs. We just don't have estimates for those currently. The winter forecast right now assumes a normal November, December, so if we have any large snowfalls, that is not accounted for, but it is based on actual normal November and December winter. Hiring and discretionary expenditure freeze also remains in effect. We also talk about the efficiencies. In the budget, we've included reductions in spending, discretionary expenditure reductions of $4.8 million, and currently we are on track with those. We're actually $900,000 below budget. The administrative review, as I mentioned, the 35 FTEs were eliminated early on, so we had actually $2 million savings there. And then departmental specific reductions were also achieved, and then also in the revenue improvements we're achieving those, and for those that we can't, we will manage those throughout the budget. In terms of the service review programs, the administrative restructuring, the 50 FTEs were eliminated. There's also a large restructuring in July, and we're continuing to restructure. The effects of those will be in the 2017 budget. The rationalization of accommodations, that now reports under the General Manager of Corporate Services, and That is an ongoing effort to rationalize overall accommodations for the city. Summer student program, any deficiencies identified there will be reflected in the 2017 budget. Fleet Services also now reports to General Manager of Corporate Services, and what we're looking for is an optimal fleet replacement strategy, and any savings there would be reflected in the 2017 budget. For winter operations, there was a report that was approved in July, and for paramedic services, there is a review underway, and parks, buildings, and grounds, there's a review with recommendations and would be part of the 2017 budget. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Some good news for our citizens. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and yes, it was a much better report than what we were looking at for last year, so thank you very much. I have a question. It doesn't include library and police, et cetera, as you said, but we did include the benefit that we got from Hydro Ottawa, so I'm just asking, you must have a sense of how they're doing and what kind of an impact to the overall picture. Do you have any sense of that right now?
You're referring to transit, to public health,
yes,
and to library. They're all coming in with surpluses or breaking even.
Wow. That's great news. And the other thing I have, this is probably a question more for Mr. Chenier, and, because you did allude to doing some program reviews, but having the reduction in the money, the revenue from programming, that concerns me because we also had an increase in the new bodies, if you will, in the city. There was a line there of $2.4 million or something like that. The one, I think is one before. Yeah, the assessment growth, yeah. So my question is, and I know that you've been working at Parks and Recreation piece by piece, but for example, is it in the fitness area that the revenue is less than what was projected?
Chair, there are in the $700,000 that you see in revenue shortage for Parks and Recreation. There are two main components to that. The first is the perennial sponsorship shortage in revenue, and by year end that will appear in another budget because it's being moved out of Parks and Recreation.
You're talking the sponsorship?
The sponsorship funding. The second half, about $400,000 that does remain in Parks, Recreation, and Culture is primarily arena rental revenue. It's tracking right now to be about $2 million short of projected revenue. Part of the mitigation for that, you'll recall earlier this year, Council approved a new allocations policy that includes a new cancellation period and some new procedures for bookings. We think that that will start to mitigate this fall because it's now being implemented for this fall. It won't catch all of it, and so the strategy for year-end 2016 remains to have offsetting expenditure reductions, but we think that next year we'll start to see that set right for both arenas and sports fields as we implement the new strategy.
So when you're talking about the review that you're going to do on the rinks themselves, I think, has that started the review that you're doing of the various facilities, what the operating costs are, what the use cost is, and whether or not we can close some and invest in others?
That has just started. We are looking at the level of operation for each of the rinks. We are looking at how to consolidate bookings into fewer arenas, especially during off-season, to start saving money, as well as part of the reorganization announced in July. We are bringing on the operating side of that was previously under Public Works, and we are starting to look at operational efficiencies between what was previously Public Works staff and Recreation staff to drive down those expenses.
And would you look at something like, for example, when the rinks are down, at like new take-up sports, for example, indoor BMX or indoor skateboarding or the like, or what do we used to call it, roller skating, that kind of thing. 1967, I worked at a pool. I managed a complex in 1967, and we had outdoor pool and we had roller skating, and it was so successful. But I'm just saying, there's always some trends that are changing.
We are seeing a resurgence in roller skating and roller derby in our arenas as a summer use, but we are looking at other investments that would allow us during the off-season to repurpose arena floors for other programs, everything from courts, indoor tennis, to badminton, to all those other kinds of things. So yes, we're looking at a strategy of how to aggressively market off-season ice time to a different client group.
And what kind of timing is that going to take? Will that be ready for 2017?
Some of it will be 2017. Some of it will likely be beyond that. Some of the more structural changes on how we operate arenas will likely be more for the fall of 2017 than this immediate season.
And I just have one more question. The work that Mr. McNair is doing at his shop on the looking at every one of our facilities, are you going to cross each other on that? Because I would think that work, that investigation he's doing, looking at the Walter Baker, making sure it's maximized, the opportunities there, looking at the state of other places, will you be working with him on that?
Yes, we're already engaged with Mr. McNair's team in looking at underutilized space and recreation facilities and looking at how to repurpose them, either through direct programming and relocating of direct programming, through outside uses if there's an opportunity to do that. In some cases, that is the best option. So yes, we are looking at that, as well as current tenants in our building and the level of their tenancy in our building and how that is working, because it is fairly uneven across the city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Councillor Arter. I should also point out, I want to thank staff for the work that they've done with our budget review group, which was an idea of Councillor Eglai, and Councillor Hubley and Cloutier have been very good at collectively keeping our feet to the fire to ensure that we don't end up in a situation where, as I said at the last budget review process, we run out of runway to correct a problem that we see early on. So Councillor Hubley and Cloutier have been very helpful, and that was an initiative from Councillor Eglai, and the staff have been great. We're keeping feet to the fire, but we're trying not to micromanage the organization. So it's that balance of looking at the big picture that seems to be working well, and we see those results. So Councillor El Shantiri, please. Question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Madam Treasurer, if you put slide number 9 on, I just have a question about the provincial announcement. So do we know what's that mean in dollar-wise to our city? Because this is a huge across the province, and I hear from my colleague and other municipalities. So can you just tell me what number we'd be looking at?
I wish I could tell you what number we're going to be looking at, but this will be something that we only become aware of as the claims are being made. We don't have any way to know how many first responders feel that they are suffering from PTSD. It's not really something that's been well tracked in the past. So it's both the post-traumatic stress disorder and the continuation of adding on more cancers for the firefighters that's causing the big pressure in WSIB costs for us. So I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't have any idea what that number would look like at this point in time.
And do we have a process in place, like some area where they have a third-party review for the claim when it comes to WSIB, or that's all been managed by WSIB and we just have to pay the increase of after the WSIB?
I'd have to get confirmation on that, but I understand that the process is with WSIB as a Schedule II employer. They basically make a determination, and then we pay the costs. So I don't know if there's an ability, and I'll check with Mr. Devonte whether in fact we could put it towards our Great West Life and ask them to verify or to, but I would suspect WSIB would not take kindly to having their opinion second-guessed, but we'll look into that.
Okay. And my other question, When you talk about the growth assessment, does that mean this year growth assessment going to be higher than the last couple of years? Like it's going to be more than 1 point, whatever was last year, 1.7, 1.3 last year?
It was, we had forecasted to be 1.3. It came in higher. It generated an additional $4.2 million in taxation revenue, which we just parked in non-departmental. That $4.2 million will be allocated to those tax rates that generated, including police, including transit, and the city. So that will be split. That's a 2016 effect. We're still looking at 1.3 for 2017 based on what we're seeing so far, but we only know what's coming in when we get the supplementary assessment rolls in, and we can have a look how much more assessment has MPAC added in. Because this was a reassessment year, though, I can tell you MPAC's focus has not been necessarily on adding properties, but making certain that the values that are going out are correct. So this may be, the supplementary rolls for 2016 may generate maybe a little bit more than 1.3, but I'm optimistic we'll get 1.3 for 2017.
Because that's the third year in a row we see the hydro endowment increase. So you don't think there's time for us to start budgeting the right number versus always lower and come higher? I know it's a good news for us to get higher, no doubt. So.
You actually have. When we had the AGM for Ottawa Hydro in July, there was a motion, or as part of their presentation, they said set the dividend at $20 million.
Okay.
And so, yes, we will be adjusting that for 2017.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Great. Thanks, Councillor. Excuse me, Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank staff for their work on this. I know it's been quite a struggle to get us into a surplus position, and it's taken a lot of effort. I have a couple of questions. One, on page 13, where you list the 16 jobs being further evaluated, is that the 16 jobs that you're showing as eliminating?
No, that is that's positions that are. Is that the retirement or is that the vacant?
It just shows it's a grid and on the. Under staffing retirements, yes.
It's under
16
retirement.
positions were referred for action through job evaluation.
Exactly.
And then I think it's the next page, it shows a reduction of 15.32 FTEs. So
they're not the same positions.
Not the same.
When someone retires now, the management look at whether that position can be deleted or what has to happen to it. And a lot of times you're going to have that position go through job evaluation because it's going to change. It's not going to be the same position as it was before.
Different, okay, thank you. The other question I have, and I'll speak to Mr. Kanellakis if I could, we fully support and really appreciate the work you did on realigning the organization from the top and the savings that's produced, but also the more the focus on the core services that the city's trying to deliver. We see up here that Public Works is again the top of the list with a $10.8 million deficit. Is there further work being done with Public Works to try to bring their budgeting into a better situation, or is there nothing else we can do here?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the Public Works deficit, as the Treasurer said, was, as a result of the snow deficit projection, and we're hoping that starts lining up before year end. And we're also looking at bolstering the snow reserve going forward. However, all the departments are now currently under a review in terms of the next step of the realignment, which will be part of the 2017 budget, and that's where you'll start seeing the results and the outcomes relating to the departments and how the departments actually become leaner and more cost efficient. So you'll see the financial results of that in another month and a half or so.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Davies.
That was a nice segue into exactly what I wanted to talk about, which is the corporate reorg that's going on, and seeing that we've eliminated 36 FTE vacant positions already. I'm presuming that the phase 2 of the corporate reorg is going to eliminate more. So just wondering how significant an impact we should expect to see on the overall budget position, given the good news in this document and then the work that you're doing.
Through the mayor, as was tabled, I believe, last year with the budget, there was a projected deficit of budget shortfall of about $35 million, I believe, in the report that was identified going into 2017. That's the number that management is now chasing in terms of balancing the budget and dealing with that. So it's going to be a combination of solutions. It's not just going to be based on the realignment and the next step of the realignment. I mean, that would go probably further than council would want, I think, in terms of not impacting services. So we've been working with the treasurer and all the general managers to find a multitude of solutions, including the realignment, to bring back a balanced budget, which I believe we're going to be able to do for 2017 and 2018.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Just on that, one of the concerns that some members of council raised was that this exercise would hurt frontline services. Have there been any reductions to frontline services, Mr. Kanalakis, as a result of this report?
Absolutely not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blais, please.
Thanks very much. I wanted to touch on the assessment, the $4 million in assessment growth. What was driving that difference?
Actually, what drove that difference was the Deputy Treasurer of Revenue got on the phone to MPAC and told them they needed to get the Lansdowne assessment on there. So they fast-tracked that. So that's what made the difference, is really those properties got added on earlier than we thought they would have. So we didn't expect to see them on the returned roll for 2016. We thought they'd come in as a SUP, but they, in fact, got it on the roll earlier.
Okay, well, thank you. And what's the lag time with MPAC now between family moving into their home or their apartment and their property coming onto the roll?
It all depends on the type of property. Unique properties take longer, but subdivisions, for example, where it's basically the same property over and over again, the lag time there is about 6 months. For unique properties, that can take anywhere up to 2 years because they have to be visited and vetted, and there's a lot of back and forth on those. But generally, MPAC is giving us service within the time frame that they have identified. We have a service level agreement with them, so they're more or less respecting that agreement. And if they don't, we have an opportunity to complain to them, and we have a dedicated customer rep who will bring it up the chain if we don't do it ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Blais. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In our discussions just previously, it made me think in terms of revenue that we're not getting from sponsorship, etc. We had, as part of our renewable energy strategy process on Thursday, we had a sounding board group that had 60 or so participants from across the city, and a number of people mentioned the fact that city roofs, that is, roofs on city buildings and even land on city property, may have quite willing investors who would be prepared to put up solar projects on that land or on those buildings if the city was open to it. And the sense, I paraphrase here already, the sense was that managers of those buildings who, although they definitely have a responsibility to protect that asset, seem to be a little too protective, not as open as they could be, almost as if, protective of their own territory, not wanting to see something new happen, and that opportunities were being lost there for the city to gain some revenue and for renewable energy projects to be put in. Of course, Mr. Chenier's there. That can apply to parks and rec facilities, arenas, pools, community centers are obvious ones, but of course there's many other city buildings as well. So I suppose I bring that comment. You may have a response to that at the moment, but just I've been hearing that from a number of sources, including my conversations with Harder Ottawa as well, as we've tried to roll out this council commitment, or previous council, to have 20 rooftops, and we're not even close to having those 20 yet. In a sense, the question, what's the delay, and what can we do short of putting our assets at risk to be more open to those sorts of revenue-earning projects? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, so one of the benefits of the first corporate reorg that happened was the establishment of a corporate landlord. So Mr. McNair has been tasked with that. So he is now really the owner of those buildings. Mr. Chenier is the occupant and is responsible for looking after the buildings that he's in, but really the corporate landlord function. So has been established, and his objective is to both rationalize our facilities but also to optimize the use of our facilities. And so that would include things like solar panels on rooftops. So that is now under his jurisdiction. So hopefully with consolidating that, making one group accountable, responsible for it, you'll see some action on that file.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Fire and bylaw, I understand, I think I get the operational pressures they're facing, but paramedics and long-term care, not so used to seeing those. What are the pressures driving the deficit we're seeing in both of those shops?
In long-term care, it's basically, they are really a 24/7 operations. When you have someone phone in sick, you can't leave that position vacant. There have to be so many people on the ward working with the residents, so you have to bring someone in. We had built in previous years, the same as we do for all other departments, a vacancy provision. So they were not getting their full allocation of compensation dollars. It was being reduced by that vacancy provision. So last year we recognized the fact that that this was causing a perpetual deficit because they never could meet that vacancy provision because they're always calling staff in. So we started to rectify it in the 2016 budget. It'll be fully rectified, changed in the 2017 budget. In paramedics, it's a combination of the same thing. They cannot leave a position unstaffed. The ambulances have to go out, so they call people in. So they can't meet their vacancy provision as well. But as well, the increased call volumes are causing pressures in terms of the supplies that they are using. So that's part of the pressures for paramedics.
Okay, thank you. So are we seeing, just with respect to the call-in 6, are we seeing a corresponding increase above the norm, which was always higher than, I think, other shops, in, city staff going on long-term disability in those two departments? At a higher rate or a faster rate than
Not that I'm aware of, but that's a question I'll have to take back and further research, because I don't know. I haven't heard anything that would say they're different, but we know in paramedics, for example, yes, they have a higher incident of illness, just the nature of the work. But I don't think they do in long-term care, but I'll get back to you on both of those questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. So received on the report? Received. Notice is a motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't read through the whole motion, but the intent of the motion is, of course, 2017 is the 150th birthday. We do have a citywide fund set aside that community groups can apply to. But I've certainly heard a lot of exciting and interesting ideas coming from my area. I sat down and I spoke to the two co-chairs, Councillor Couche and Fleury, about whether there's going to be enough dollars in the bank, so to speak. And what I was suggested to them was currently in each of our office budgets, we have a cap on the sponsorship dollars that we can spend for community events. I suggested that as a one-time only for 2017, we extend that cap by a further $5,000, which would allow more community associations, sporting groups, church groups, whatever community groups to put a 2017 flavor to their events. And again, I think there's no new money. It's within our existing budgets. It just gives us a bit more flexibility about how we spend that money and a bit more of an opportunity to partner up with our community groups. So I'm hoping next meeting when we deal with this that everybody will be in support.
Okay, so that's a notice of motion. Are there other notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meeting? We have Councillor Moffat would like to move the appointment of a new member on the 2017 board because Mr. Bashir is no longer in his position. So rules of procedure be suspended. Carried. Councillor Moffat, if you'd like to introduce the motion, please.
Thank you. Yes, as the Mayor mentioned, Saad Bashir has moved on from his economic development role, which means he's vacated his position on the 2017 board. The motion speaks to that and recommends that that Mr. Bashir be replaced with the manager of 2017 operations and special events on the board of directors. That currently is held by Dan Brisebois. So this motion would merely just remove Saad Bashir and place Dan Brisebois on the 2017 board.
Right. On the motion, carried. And thank Saad. He was a great contributor to that group. Any written inquiries? Other business? Adjournment? And the information previously distributed is also on the agenda. Adjournment? Carried. Adopté? Merci. Our next meeting is the 4th of October, 2016.